Welcome to our podcast. This is Jordan and I's podcast. As you guys can see, the format has changed today. Mr. Jordan has gone overseas for a while, so this will be our format going forward. So let's get on with that. So as we realized that Jordan was going overseas and we'll have to have a long distance friendship, we discussed what topic will we do, and we said long distance relationships. They sound so fitting. So we're going to be discussing relationships today and everything that entails. Another reason for this is because I find myself, I think I'm doing it wrong because I am still a single man, and I don't know about Jordan, but he must have some trick up his sleeve because he is not a single man. I think he can tell us more about that later. But his success and my unsuccess must be due to some kind of reason. Maybe it's just the luck of the draw. Who knows? So that's what we're here to discuss today. So because it's a hot topic and there's a lot of ideas that I have and thoughts I have that I'd like to bounce off of Mr. Jordan's wisdom. And hopefully I can see the flaws in my way of thinking. So I am going to start off with a question for you.
All right. This is kind of the format that we've prepared, eh? You have a couple of questions. I also have a couple of questions. And these are very targeted towards the context behind our state of relationship, if I could call it that. Go ahead.
Not with each other.
Yeah, no.
Okay, so the first question I have for you, and I recall we were having a discussion at work, and I said this to you, and you said you had a different opinion on it completely. So I want to bring up that question again, and I want to hear your views on it. So it is regarding expectations within a relationship. So I had the view that having no expectation whatsoever from your partner is a good thing and allows for them to flourish. But you seem to disagree with me on that. Can you please tell me why you think expectation in a relationship is maybe a good thing? As I'm not sure.
I think because of how vague the question is, it's a very easy question to answer. But we'll get more specific. I can answer that by saying why expectation is a good thing to have in life. Expectation, in the way I understand it, is a desired way that things are going to happen, a defined measure for good and bad, a way that you already struggling to come up with a really nice definition of expectation now, but in my head I'm basically saying it is a boundary that you draw, or a set of situations that you expect, I'm using the word expect, beforehand, that you can judge the person on in the future. And this gives you clear boundaries of what is good and what is bad in terms of what the other person is doing. You can give them clear feedback. You know when you are both reaching a certain goal. You know when you're both not doing something right. So for me, the idea of expectation, especially communicated expectation, very clearly outlines who you're supposed to be in the relationship and who the other person expects you to be. This is a frustration that I think a lot of guys have, is, who am I supposed to be in this relationship? And the easiest answer to that is the gender role, which gives us some vague outlines of what you should do. Now, as a man in a relationship, if something happens, there's a very vague idea of what you're supposed to do. And I want to call that, there's an expectation. And if not for that expectation, what are you supposed to do? How do you know how to act? So I almost want to say expectation gives you direction in terms of how you're supposed to act in a relationship, and how to know whether you're going off the right track. So that's a very vague answer. How do you feel about that?
Okay. I don't like that at all. So there's a very big danger that comes from it. I see the positive side of it. It gives you guidance, okay? So for someone who is lost, guidance is always good, right? But I think as soon as you brought it up as a clearly communicated expectation and clearly uncommunicated expectation, I think we should draw a line there. And then also we should draw a line between expectations and boundaries. I think there's a difference there. I look at boundaries as how not to act in the relationship, with an unacceptable type of acting. And then there's the expectation of, when the word expectation kind of says how you're supposed to act, the positive side of it. So the line will be what you shouldn't do and what you should do. So expectation is what you should do in the relationship based on the other person's opinion. And so
Okay.
when I say expectations are bad, I speak of what that other person's positive desires are for the relationship, right? And how you're supposed to be positively acting based on what they want. But back to the previous line, which was not the boundaries and expectations, but uncommunicated ones. Any uncommunicated expectation is bad. I think we can both agree on that, because now how is the guidance supposed to help the person if you haven't communicated to them that guidance? Because you've clearly said that it's the guidance of the expectation that helps, and that's a positive thing. But the reason I think it's still bad is because, let's say my partner has a very clear expectation of what they want, right? And I act that way for 10 years, maybe 15 years. One of three things can happen, maybe one of four things. But the first is, I could be quite unhappy with the person I've become, because I was not becoming who I wanted to be, or who I naturally was going to end up being, following my own, expectations of what I want to be as a man. But I was following her expectations, and that can very, negatively blow up in your face at the end of the day. Or even she might think that she wants you to be a certain way, and you act that way, and then to her annoyance, she was wrong. So I think it's dangerous, because yes, you guide the person towards something, but neither of you know if that thing is a good thing, and if that's what you're going to be wanting in the long run. So I find it safer to have zero expectations of the person. You give them no guidance in terms of what you want them to be, because I believe when you commit to a marriage with someone, it's not about what I want you to be, it's who you are and who you will be for the rest of your life, good or bad, till death do us part. I will love you for who you are. And now I agree that boundaries can be good, because there should be boundaries laid out, but that's what the boundary of the marriage lays out for you. And there's a pre-decided or pre-agreed upon what that boundary is. But I think I want my wife one day to flourish in who she is, not who I want her to become. I want her to become who she is meant to be, or unguided by me, but rather maybe by God or
Yeah, so I
thing.
see what you're saying. You almost want to discover this beautiful person that she is, and the more you learn about each other, it in a sense makes there's a nice picture that's painted there, and it's a picture where you learn who the other person is, unhindered by a certain direction that you've laid out for them. And then also, if you feel, I very much acknowledge the point that there can be conflict between who you want them to be and who you've communicated you want them to be, and who maybe they want to be, and then what do you do with that now? But it seems that the only reason you don't want to communicate expectation is because of the risks of expectation. But then I also want to ask you, what is the risk of no expectation? Because you're looking at the positive side of no expectation, which is maybe the probability that you'll discover this person so wonderfully, and they'll just grow in a direction and you'll learn to love them. But who's to say that that's actually a feasible reality? I would actually say trying a direction, getting feedback, and then and then dealing with the differences between who they feel they are and who you'd like them to be, or a way in which you'd like them to be, is more of, I want to say, heading better in the right direction than aimlessly letting the person be, and just giving positive feedback when they might do something that you like. And then also, you aren't forced to properly look at yourself and think very deeply what it is you want from the person, because it's very easy to sit by yourself and think, I like this, I like that. But when you have to communicate to the other person and outline exactly how you'd like them to be in a fantasy, or this is exactly how I'd like you to be, this is exactly the things I like, and I'd like if you did them, you think much more deeply about what it is that you like, and you think perhaps about why you like those things. So I want to almost say there's a lot more space for internal reflection and a much better feedback system when you have to communicate your expectations very clearly to the other person. And also your frustration, now that's one point, very good feedback mechanism that happens there. Your risk is that, and this is a good point, this is one of the questions I was going to ask you, people in a relationship tell each other what they want, but who's to say we know what we want? Like, how well do you trust yourself to do things that you know you'll like in 2 or 3 years? That's why a lot of people don't do tattoos. It's because they don't trust themselves to make a decision now that they know they'll be happy with in the future. So we're very good at evaluating ourselves and how untrustworthy we are, even with our own desires. But now we need to trust a whole other person to give us clear instructions about this person that they want us to be. And that makes absolutely no sense. But the problem with that argument is it falls apart in, let me elaborate on that. I see you making a face there. So if we can't even trust ourselves to make the right decision for us in the future. So I don't even know what I want within a 2-year span, or maybe even a 6-month span. I'm not sure if the things I choose now are the things I'll choose then. Why should we trust our partner when they communicate with us effectively? Because most likely in 6 months to a year's time, the person that they say they want me to be is most likely not going to be the person that they actually like. So we're very bad determiners of what we'll like in the future and what will make us happy. So,
but that sounds like you're making my argument.
But that argument, the reason it falls apart is because any form of effective communication then is problematic. Any form of feedback is problematic, because how can I trust that what you say now, you will still say in 6 months' time? So there is a risk to listening to the person, and it's to trust that they will start to listen to themselves better. And it has to happen in any situation. Effective communication of boundaries or expectations both run the same risk.
I still think, okay, let me give you this question then. If I have expectations of how you should act, or my partner should act, right, and they disagree, what then? How would you manage that if you're in your mentality, if you're allowed to have expectations? So I expect that you buy me a chocolate every day,
yeah,
and you think that's absurd. Now what? Now I've communicated clearly my expectation, and you are not agreeing with it. That's unfair. Why? Because now I have an
Okay.
Am I allowed to have an expectation?
All right. So this is a completely different question, because now you're going into the dynamics of how to communicate effectively and negotiate expectation. Right. I'm just reframing this question. And if you find the answer to that question, please let me know. Because it's a really difficult question to answer. This is something I hit that pothole many times. And if I had to just elaborate more on the question, you'll see where I am with it. there's this concept called being reasonable in a relationship. I mean, you'll see I'm smiling a bit there when I say that, because what does it mean to be reasonable, and who defines being reasonable? Because if your partner is expecting something from you and it comes from the way that they feel, then you can draw that right down to, okay, what makes you feel the way that you feel? This is the way that you grew up, the media that you consume, the conditioning of your environment. So that means your expectation is created by your condition and your environment and your parents and the way that they did their relationship. Why is that a good expectation? Now, that's the question. Let's say you had wonderful parents, you perhaps had a good environment, and you consume good media, which for our sake is biblical media on how relationship dynamics should work. Then perhaps that's a reasonable expectation. But most people don't have those in check. Most, if not all people, have very problematic media consumption, parents' relationships. So then it becomes very difficult, because when your partner communicates a need to you, you need to assess whether it is right of you to address this need, or perhaps address it in the way that they've communicated they want it to be addressed. And I make a line here right into toxic relationships, which is, people say a good relationship is, one of the factors of a good relationship is a very effective communication. Both of you understand what the other person needs and what they want, and you're able to negotiate with each other to meet each other's needs. But a toxic relationship, you can almost define as extraordinary or like just wrong needs that both of you are broken enough to feel at the right time. And so you both meet each other where you both need each other, but it's in a way that is toxic for both of you. But if you communicate, both of you, effectively, then you come to this resolution of the ways you should act. But in the end, the relationship doesn't last. Now, just a stupid example here is, let's say I want you to call me 5 times a day, and I want us to at least have a 25-minute conversation each time we call. This is obviously impractical, but my desire to make you happy and your desire to feel like, I don't know, you're with me, both makes us agree to this way of doing our relationship. But I think it doesn't take an idiot to know that sort of relationship dynamic will not last just because of life. And you can also then try and tie a string into, there are perhaps some universal relationship dynamics that work for everyone. And when you cross those universal relationship boundaries, your relationship most likely will fail. So the conversation then steers towards, okay, where can we find these universal relationship laws by which we can kind of abide, so that we don't find ourselves in a situation where we are effectively communicating, but so effectively wrong that the relationship goes down the hill. So that's just not answering your question at all, but elaborating on the problem there and kind of guiding it towards a solution of, well, we need to find a place where we can both test our expectations against. And what is that? It needs to be outside ourselves.
Okay. So I'm gonna just ask a last thing there. I think I realize that we have quite similar perspectives. So I agree on the fact that you should communicate your expectations, but it seems where we differ, and this is what I'm only thinking, but please correct me if I'm wrong. Where we differ is when a communicated expectation has been communicated. How bound are you to that expectation? In the sense where if I ask for a chocolate every day and you do not give me that chocolate, now that I've communicated, do I have ground to be upset with my partner for not reaching that expectation? Because that's what I'm trying to say with there shouldn't be expectation. Yes, you should communicate your likes and your dislikes, but when I say you should not have any expectations, is you should not be able to have the ground to be upset with your partner because they didn't meet your expectation of how you should have acted. And how would you say, in your difference in opinion, how much ground is the person allowed to be upset when you don't meet the person's communicated expectations?
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, can you be held to expectation, and should you be, and when is it right to be? Let's take a typical scenario. A woman really likes it, or your partner really likes it when you open the door for her, just in general, maybe when you go into the car. You do this for her because you like making her happy, and this makes her very happy. So you open the door for her every single time. At one point or another, you forget to do it for whichever other reason, and in that moment, is she allowed to feel sad? Is she allowed to feel sadness that you have forgotten about? This makes her feel cared for. It makes her feel like you're important to her. So in that moment, maybe she doesn't feel those things, which feels the negative versions of those things. Is she allowed to feel that?
I think she's allowed to feel that, definitely. But for her to hold me to that feeling of saying it's my fault that she feels that way, there I would draw the line. Because yes, maybe I forgot. Is it now my inability to have a perfect memory is grounds for her to give me the cold shoulder or something like that, you see? So I would say whatever she feels, whatever anyone feels, they are completely allowed to feel that. But the reason I say you shouldn't have expectations of the partner is because as soon as you have expectations, you feel like your feelings are now an entitlement to put down the other person for their wrong behavior, as if it can now be defined as wrong because it didn't fit into your expectations. So I didn't open the door for the girl. Okay, life goes on, but when I do, it will have so much more meaning, because I don't do it because I just want to act according to the script. I do it and I go out of my way because I want to do it, and I think that allows for love to be so much more pure, and everything that is done for each other has so much more value or beauty. Well, I don't know. That's my expectation.
Okay, so
that's
the hold it against the person is, I think, we just missing each other on that definition. Yeah, that's the only difference between us, because you're saying giving the cold shoulder, put me down. To what extent is she allowed to express her feeling to you before it becomes holding against? And the reason this is such a tricky question is because that's completely subjective to the man in the situation. Perhaps some men, the cold shoulder in that situation, with the understanding that I didn't open the door for it's okay, she feels this way, and she will feel this way for 10 minutes and then it'll be fine. But for other men, it's offensive. It's like, seriously, I do this not because I have to, but because I want to, and I want to make you feel happy, and your mood is ruined because of this. Seriously. So then those are two men in the same situation where the expression of the sadness, which is warranted, was exactly the same. So how are you going to define hold against? Because she is allowed to feel, but she's not allowed to express it.
Yeah. Okay. No. Oh. Whoa. She's allowed to express herself.
Is she? Because now she's holding it against me. Yeah.
So I'm thinking of 3 categories here. The first category will be if she uses that as a tactic for manipulation. Be like, oh, you didn't open the door for me. You are a bad boyfriend, and you should buy me dinner or something like that. So that kind of expression is manipulation, and if your expression of emotions become manipulative, then no, she's not allowed to do that. That is wrong. If it is a expression of emotions like this is how I feel, this is why it happened, and I'm communicating this to you, and I'm not upset with you, I'm simply upset, and I realize that this is how I feel, and you're okay with each other, and you're able to separate the problem from the relationship. You're able to say, this incident made me feel this way, and I'm communicating towards you so that we can try and avoid that in the future. But I'm not holding it against you such that if we have an argument, I can now bring it up and be like, but you never opened the door for me, because it's not a point of I can hold you against it. So she's allowed to express her emotions, of course, but if she holds you against that expectation in an argument or in a form of manipulation, then it is wrong for her to express it in such a way, because I wouldn't call that expression then, if that answers your question.
But that's very direct, and I agree with you, but the problem is it's such an extreme example that it makes the situation easy. I think the expression of sadness is a lot less intentional than what you think. The way you're describing it is like, once this thing happens, the woman sits with A, B, C, D in front of her, and she picks one of them, and then, no one's a millionaire. But there's this idea in this book now that I read where, acts, when a man doesn't treat a woman with love, she responds with disrespect. Not because she decides to, but because this is a natural dynamic of relationship. Now, you can agree with that dynamic, but there's still a truth in that stream, which is ways that you treat your partner will naturally make them treat you in a certain way. So now, holding against you is a very difficult concept to break down, because I naturally treat you in a certain way because of how you've treated me. And whether this happens on a big scale or a large scale, it does happen. And clear, defined communication does make, you can argue that this makes it worse or better. I think this is now where you go. You do have expectations whether you outlie them or not. Like, a deep down inside, you do have expectations of how your partner should act. And this is based on the way that you grew up and the media that you consume. And now it kind of becomes an argument, I almost want to say, of what's better, your partner disappointing the soft expectations you have deep inside, and then you not communicating that to them because, well, you never did before, so you can't tell them what they did was wrong because you never even told them what was right, so you can't say anything there, you just keep it to yourself. Or would you rather communicate it and then you see where the other direction is going? But this is I don't think we'll come to a resolution here. This is a very circular argument.
Yeah.
And the reason you can't define it properly is because of the subjective nature of a relationship.
Yeah, so I think actually for this podcast, this question has been sufficient. We're definitely going to have multiple podcasts about relationships. But what I want to say is that I definitely understand the necessity to communicate expectations. And when I say you have expectation, I do mean that you're allowed to hold them against that expectation. That's actually what I mean by that question. I realize that now. So are you allowed to have expectations? If I ask that question, the answer is obviously can be yes, because everyone has it by default. Are you supposed to communicate those expectations? I think that is a yes also, because that allows you and your partner to understand the feelings within the relationship. Why did you get upset about this? Why did this make you happy? And that can help for a very sustainable, very happy relationship. So communicating them is definitely a yes as well. But then I still feel like as soon as you cross the border of holding them to it to such an extent, it's like raising a child and clearly defining what your child should become from their birth. You're going to be a great sports player, that kind of parent. I don't think that kid ever can become who they would have wanted to become, because they were never given that ability to explore it. So I think there is a limitation towards what expectations you do communicate to your partner, because sometimes if you give them every single expectation that you have, I think that kind of takes away some of the mystery and the romance of a relationship in some sense. But that's, I guess, something I'll have to still see. I can't really say that out of experience, but that's more a projection towards. I see this kind of utopia in a relationship where neither of the individuals are holding each other to any expectations, but they act in such a way where they want to discover each other's points of what makes them happy, and they try it out, they test it out, they see how the other person reacts, they learn from feedback on how the person reacts, and not necessarily how they sit down each night at dinner and discuss how should they have acted that day to make sure that the other person would have been satisfied with their attempt to be a good partner. It feels so contractual almost, and that's why I'd want to steer away from that. But yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Well, so based on the description that you gave now, I almost want to say you're agreeing with me because you're essentially saying what you've described is a way to discover expectations and not to just come with preconceived ones. And now when I reflect on our views, I think the only difference between our opinions is the passage of time. So when you're new to a relationship and you haven't been in a lot of relationships, you don't really have that many expectations, or you don't have ones that are strong enough that you'd communicate them to the other person. So even just opening the door, it's like that is only so strong if perhaps your father had done it or whatever. So there's a exploration of expectation when it comes to a new relationship, and an exploration of what you like the other person to be like and what you don't like about them and all of that. But now what about ones that I almost want to let's call that the expectation honeymoon phase, where you can do no wrong, or you can just kind of do whatever you want and you're discovering each other. But now after that point, you become a bit more critical of each other, in the sense that not everything the person does is amazing and wonderful, and they can do no wrong. They can do wrong. And when they can do wrong, it's much better that you define what they shouldn't do wrong. And that's why I say it's really just a passage of time. Your expectations should become clearer as your relationship progresses. But at the beginning, no, of course not. I agree with you. You shouldn't at the beginning say, this is what I want you to be like, this is what I want you to do. And that would be so sad, because what are you missing out on now? You don't even know what this person would have been like. What if their default was so much better than your initial base expectation? So you're stealing a whole world away from yourself. So I absolutely agree with you on that. But there's a big warning sign there, which is to understand the honeymoon phase very well and understand precisely how it differs from when you get into the normal phase of a relationship. This is outlined in one of Gary Chapman's books. He says, at the beginning of a relationship, you'll find things that the person does incredible that later you'll find to be the most horrible quality about the person. So an easy example, a boyfriend that's very analytical. Woman at the beginning will be like, wow, he just grounds me, and I'll just go off on a tangent, but then he sits me down and he's able to square up my emotions and just put it in a box so neatly, and it's just so refreshing. And that is the exact way that women express they have such a frustration with their husbands with later on in the relationship. So it's so important to understand then in your exploration phase what is the real stuff you're going to look out for, and to really try and be true to yourself in what you're really enjoying and what's just honeymooning. But I think we agree it's just the passage of time.
Okay, wow. That was a good question. I guess the rest I'll save for the next podcast.
Yeah, so I didn't get to my questions, but ties into a lot of them. Yeah.
All right. Then thanks, guys, for joining us on this episode. We will, expect you to watch it. I'm just communicating.
Yeah, so I think we'll do a couple more relationship ones, because this is, I think it's quite fun to talk about. I think we should, in the next podcast, let you talk a bit more. I think I spoke too much in this podcast. But yeah, thanks so much for listening. Hopefully the split, the new format is working.
I'm gonna say I'm not upset with how little I spoke. I didn't have much expectation of saying much.
Oh wow.
All right.
We should set some
but
boundaries.
thanks
Yeah.
for
Okay.
thanks for tuning in, guys. Cheers.